Thanks for joining me today. I'm Patrick in Vancouver, and this is Planetarian Daily. We're going to move through some genuinely interesting clinical readouts, a few corporate moves that tell us where the industry is placing its bets, and then we'll spend a little longer on two stories that I think deserve more breathing room. One about real progress in an almost impossible cancer, and another about the hidden chemistry that quietly determines whether we can actually build the clean energy future we talk about. Let's get into it. We'll start with oncology because the last few weeks have delivered a couple of data points that feel quietly significant rather than headline grabbing. First, Ideaya Biosciences and its partner Servier announced that their investigational drug for a rare eye cancer met the primary endpoint in a phase 2/3 trial. The compound is designed to target uveal melanoma, a malignancy that starts in the pigment cells of the eye. While uveal melanoma is uncommon, it's serious. When it spreads beyond the eye, outcomes have historically been poor. The fact that this targeted agent cleared its efficacy bar opens the door for an accelerated FDA filing later this year. What I find encouraging here is the precision. Local therapies for ocular tumors can sometimes avoid the heavier systemic side effects that come with traditional chemotherapy. If this drug ultimately gains approval, it could give ophthalmologists and oncologists a more tailored option for patients whose disease is caught before it metastasizes widely. Of course, we'll need to see the full data set, including how durable the responses are and what the safety profile looks like in a broader group. But meeting the primary endpoint in a registrational style study is a meaningful step forward for a rare cancer that hasn't seen many new tools. Right around the same time, another oncology company delivered news that feels even more striking because of how stubborn the disease has been. Revolution Medicines reported that its pan-RAS inhibitor, given in a phase 3 trial for metastatic pancreatic cancer, extended median overall survival by 6 months compared with standard chemotherapy. On the surface, that might not sound enormous, but context matters enormously here. Pancreatic cancer has been one of the toughest solid tumors to move the needle on. For years, even the best new agents in phase 3 have typically added only a matter of weeks, not months. This result therefore stands out. The drug is designed to hit multiple mutations in the RAS family of genes. Those mutations are thought to drive roughly 90% of pancreatic tumors, which helps explain why a single agent that can address several of them at once might finally produce a more noticeable clinical benefit. For patients and clinicians dealing with metastatic disease, 6 months of additional median survival is one of the more substantial gains we've seen in a long time. It doesn't turn pancreatic cancer into an easy disease, but it does suggest the treatment landscape could be shifting. That said, important questions remain. We'll want to understand how durable those survival gains prove to be once the data mature further and whether the benefit holds up across more diverse patient populations. Regulators will also have to weigh the high unmet need against the absolute magnitude of benefit. Still, the result feels like one of those incremental but hard-won victories that can quietly change practice if the full package looks clean. It's the kind of data that reminds me why we keep grinding away at these incredibly difficult molecular problems. While one company makes progress against an intractable solid tumor, another is testing a very different idea in blood cancer. Allogene Therapeutics shared early data on its allogeneic CAR T therapy known as cema-cel in patients with lymphoma. In the study, the off-the-shelf product eliminated minimal residual disease in 7 out of 12 patients. By comparison, only 2 out of 12 patients in the observational control arm reached the same milestone. The numbers are small, which is important to keep in mind, but the direction is encouraging. Allogeneic or ready-made CAR T therapies have been something of a holy grail because they could remove the weeks-long manufacturing delays and logistical headaches that come with autologous products made from a patient's own cells. If an off-the-shelf approach can reliably mop up lingering cancer cells after initial treatment, it could become a practical tool in the broader blood cancer toolkit. The early signal that cema-cel can do this without excessive toxicity is worth following closely as the program advances. It's interesting to see both autologous and allogeneic cell therapies continuing to evolve side by side. Each has strengths and trade-offs. The fact that allogeneic products are now showing this level of biological activity suggests the field may be getting closer to making them a standard part of care rather than an experimental curiosity. We'll see how the data look in larger cohorts, but the early read feels like another brick in the wall of evidence that ready-made cell therapies can work. These clinical wins sit against a broader backdrop of shifting corporate strategies. Big players continue to acquire assets that fit specific portfolio gaps, while smaller innovators push their own candidates forward. AbbVie, for example, agreed to pay $30 million upfront to China's Haisco Pharmaceutical for two acute pain candidates, with the full deal potentially reaching $745 million in milestones. The move makes strategic sense at a moment when non-opioid pain relief remains a major unmet need and when regulators and physicians are still looking for alternatives that don't carry addiction risks. It's another data point showing that large pharma is willing to pay for assets that could offer a cleaner safety profile in the pain space. On the smaller biotech side, Spire Therapeutics announced that its monoclonal antibody hit the primary endpoint in a phase 2 study of ulcerative colitis. The company is openly positioning the drug as a potential future competitor to Takeda's Entyvio, which has been a workhorse in inflammatory bowel disease for years. Positive phase 2 data in UC are always welcome, and this result adds yet another contender to an already growing list of options for patients with IBD. The real test will come in later trials. Can this candidate differentiate itself on efficacy, dosing convenience, or safety? That's what will ultimately decide whether it becomes a meaningful player or simply another entrant in a crowded field. Not every story this week is about success. The FDA recently reminded the entire industry that transparency in clinical research still matters a great deal. An agency review found that results remain unreported for about 30% of registered clinical studies. In response, the FDA sent reminders to roughly 2,200 drug companies, device makers, and individual researchers, urging them to post their data as required. It's a quiet but important signal. Greater transparency protects patients, allows physicians to make better decisions, and ultimately helps the scientific community move faster by learning from both positive and negative results. We've come a long way on trial registration, but compliance clearly isn't perfect yet. Moves like this help keep the pressure on. While regulators push for better reporting, investors continue to fund platforms they believe can change detection or measurement in meaningful ways. Harbinger Health closed a $100 million financing round to advance its blood-based multi-cancer early detection tests. The money coincides with the launch of the company's latest Resolve platform. Harbinger is part of a growing wave of liquid biopsy technologies that aim to spot cancers earlier through a simple blood draw rather than waiting for symptoms or relying on imaging alone. If these tests can improve early detection rates without generating too many false positives that lead to unnecessary procedures, they could meaningfully shift outcomes for several tumor types. It's still early days for the field as a whole, but the continued inflow of capital suggests investors see real potential. Some companies are also testing whether the public markets are receptive again. Ideaya Biosciences, a California company focused on high-resolution protein sequencing, has filed to raise up to $159 million in an initial public offering. The filing reflects a broader, if cautious, reopening of life sciences IPO markets after a difficult couple of years. Ideaya's technology is interesting because it could give researchers a sharper, more quantitative look at proteins, something that has historically been harder to do at scale than sequencing DNA or RNA. Better protein measurements could improve both basic science and eventually diagnostic and therapeutic development. We'll see how the offering is received, but the mere fact that it's moving forward is worth noting. The medtech sector is seeing its own form of consolidation. Stryker has acquired Amplitude Vascular Systems, while Avanos Medical is preparing to go private. These deals illustrate the continued trend of larger players absorbing specialized technologies as the industry adjusts to new economic pressures and tries to build more comprehensive portfolios. At the same time, not every corporate move is about expansion. Takeda has terminated a partnership with a Japanese firm working on small molecules that target messenger RNA, reflecting shifting research priorities. Separately, Astellas announced it will close its stem cell therapy facility in Seattle, affecting about 55 employees. These decisions are never easy, but they show how companies continually rebalance pipelines and spending in response to both scientific data and economic realities. Portfolio pruning is simply part of the rhythm of biotech and pharma. Now, let's spend a little more time on what makes that pancreatic cancer result from Revolution Medicines particularly noteworthy, because I think it's easy to understate its importance if you're not steeped in the history of this disease. Pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma has one of the lowest 5-year survival rates of any major cancer. For decades, even modest improvements in median survival were measured in weeks rather than months. So when a phase 3 trial reports a 6-month extension in median overall survival, it deserves to be taken seriously. The pan-RAS inhibitor appears to be doing something that earlier agents struggled to achieve, hitting multiple different RAS mutations that collectively drive the vast majority of these tumors. That breadth of coverage is likely part of why the benefit looks more substantial than what we've seen before. For patients with metastatic disease, this could translate into months of additional time with their families, more time to benefit from other supportive therapies, and perhaps even a bridge to future options that aren't available today. It's not a cure, and it won't transform every case, but in a disease this recalcitrant, 6 months of median survival gain is one of the more meaningful phase 3 readouts we've seen in recent years. Of course, the next chapters matter. We need to understand how durable the responses are in the tail of the survival curve, whether the benefit is consistent across different patient subgroups, and how regulators ultimately view the risk-benefit profile given the high unmet need. Those discussions will play out over the coming months, but even at this stage, the result feels like tangible progress against one of oncology's longest-standing frustrations. It's the kind of incremental win that, when added to others, can slowly change the conversation from nothing works to we're finally gaining ground. Before we wrap up, I want to shift gears completely and talk about something most of us get wrong when we think about the materials that make modern life possible. Specifically, the copper in our phones, the wiring in wind turbines, the motors in electric vehicles. Most of us picture giant open-pit mines and smoky smelters and assume the metal is simply dug out of the ground and melted. The reality is more complicated and more interesting. Roughly 70% of the world's copper comes from a mineral called chalcopyrite. Its crystal structure is stubbornly resistant to conventional extraction methods. That recalcitrance forces miners to use energy-intensive processes that generate considerable waste and require furnaces running at extremely high temperatures, sometimes above 1,000 degrees Celsius. As global demand for copper surges to support electrification, finding cleaner, more efficient ways to liberate copper from chalcopyrite isn't just an academic exercise, it's becoming central to the energy transition. Researchers are now digging into the hidden surface chemistry, the gatekeeper reactions that control how readily the mineral dissolves. A deeper understanding of that surface behavior could open the door to better bioleaching techniques, where specially selected bacteria do the heavy lifting at ambient temperatures instead of relying on massive furnaces. Bioleaching has been studied for decades, but yields on chalcopyrite have historically been low precisely because of those stubborn surface reactions. If we can crack the gatekeeper chemistry, we might be able to produce the copper we need with a much smaller energy and environmental footprint, without simply digging ever larger holes in the ground. The practical takeaway for me is that we should pay closer attention to advances in mineralogy and biohydrometallurgy. These fields don't usually make headlines, but they could determine whether the clean tech future we're building is genuinely sustainable or simply shifts environmental costs somewhere else. A single set of insights into chalcopyrite's surface behavior could have outsized impact. It's a reminder that solving climate-related challenges often requires going back to fundamental materials, science, and geochemistry, not just building more batteries or turbines. Before we go, keep an eye on how regulators ultimately view that pancreatic cancer survival data and whether more of these liquid biopsy platforms reach late-stage validation in the coming months. Both areas could shape how we treat tough cancers and how we detect them earlier. That's Planetarian Daily for today. If you enjoyed the episode, a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify really does help new listeners discover the show. I'm Patrick in Vancouver. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. This podcast is curated by Patrick, but generated using AI voice synthesis of my voice using ElevenLabs. The primary reason to do this is I unfortunately don't have the time to be consistent with generating all the content and wanted to focus on creating consistent and regular episodes for all the themes that I enjoy, and I hope others do as well.